Once again, we're discussing physicians' ethical and professional responsibility towards patients when faced with challenging diagnosis, and how issues of conscience impact both physicians and patients in healthcare practice. Our next is a millennial perspective, a millennial patient's perspective. Amanda Ackman is here, and Amanda, we're very happy to have you with us. Amanda's going to share a very personal story from her perspective, and with her insight that comes from her recent experience of being a patient. She came back to Canada from Rome, where she now studies, to speak to you. So Amanda, thank you very much for joining us. Put your hands together for Amanda.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
When I was a kid, I took the Terry Fox run very seriously. Even as an elementary student, I remember running laps around the school as if how hard I ran would be decisive for something. At the time, I was much more attached to the Terry Fox story than to my own family's history of cancer. But gradually, I had the sense that this concerned me personally, and given the prevalence of hereditary cancer in my family, I was right. In my family, there's a strong pattern of hereditary breast and ovarian cancer due to the BRCA or BRCA1 genetic mutation. My great-grandmother got breast cancer at age 30. My grandmother died of ovarian cancer at 39. My aunt nearly died of ovarian cancer at 37. And so, when my mom was in her early 30s, she chose to have a preventive mastectomy, an oophorectomy, and then several years later, when I was a teenager, she wrote a book about it called Am I Next in Line? And she told me she wrote it mainly for me. So this genetic mutation is why my maternal grandmother, from whom I received my Jewish identity, is the only grandparent who I never met. And this predisposition is the reason why my mother couldn't have more children, even though she'd hoped to. But it's also why I developed a passion for life issues, for the dignity of the human person, and for community service. So this genetic risk is really a part of a lifelong experience of family, genealogy, ancestry, faith, bioethics, belonging, and meaning. It's been a thread of continuity throughout my life, through which I've discovered the paradox that the same thing that threatens generations also binds them. And so, as soon as I was old enough to go for genetic testing, I went and confirmed my own high risk for these cancers. A few years later, when I was 25, I met a genetic counselor. It was a brief appointment, but I remember really clearly what she said to me. She said, "Our strong recommendation is for you to have a mastectomy at age 30 and to have an oophorectomy when your family is complete or by age 35, whichever is first. You can always do IVF and screen out the BRCA embryos." That was my first ever experience of counseling. And it jolted me to receive this advice, of course, that were my own mother to have taken, would have resulted in me being selectively discarded. At the same time, I considered the recommendations for preventive surgery to be legitimate. So this is when I realized that I would really need to seek out doctors who I could trust to navigate this difficult ethical terrain. And thankfully, I found a CPL family doctor who became an amazing advocate for me and who I could trust not only with regard to my physical health, but also to cooperate with me in affirming certain ethical values. He became for me an anchor among a constellation of so many experts who, while well-meaning, did not always share our understanding of what it means to be human. When I was meeting him, I looked forward to every appointment, and it was worth every Uber ride that I took to get there because of how seriously he took me. When I was 29, I had another call with a different genetic counselor, and by then I had decided to proceed with the preventive mastectomy. The epiphany during this appointment came when she told me that there are better and worse reconstructive surgeons, and that the better ones are usually booked because they're good. When she told me about the one she considered to be the best, she didn't just talk about the proficiency of his skill, but she conveyed to me something of his character. And it was those things that she said that made me feel the most hopeful about him. I eagerly awaited the referral and recall that the email came on a Friday night, just as I was leaving a patio where I'd had dinner with a friend. As soon as I got the name, I biked a few blocks away until I was out of sight and then feverishly began Googling the surgeon's name. I must have read everything he's ever tweeted, and I also found a documentary about his surgical work through which I was able to glean a sense of his philosophy of care on YouTube. First, I was struck by how he, this particular surgeon, compared surgery to painting and sculpture rather than to plumbing and mechanics. Like your textbooks say or something. He had clearly reflected on the meanings of terms and described the aim of his work as contributing to a person's sense of normality and wholeness. Through the video, I heard him speak about how he had explained his work to his own children and the impact that helping patients going through cancer had on him. He said things like, "In surgery, you need confidence to do what you're doing, but the best surgeons that I know don't have that godlike character or ego, and helping the patient out when they're in trouble, it's a great privilege to be involved in someone's life like that." I think it's because I was realizing how much this surgery was affecting me in my entirety, that it became important for me to be cognizant that each physician, too, has an inner moral life and a range of his or her own personal relationships, responsibilities, and commitments. And so, at the time, the more that I could know about him, the more that it increased my trust in him. It mattered that I found someone who would treat me like a person, and more specifically, the person I am. Of course, he didn't need to know that much about me. It was enough for me to trust that he saw this not just as a medical intervention, but as a life intervention. Also, to my mind, this surgery was something that we were, in a sense, doing together. And so I wanted to cooperate and ensure that we did it well. From my perspective, our encounter was as dramatic and as capable of nobility as the 20th century rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel put it when he said, this might be the most beautiful thing you ever hear about your vocation as doctors, so listen carefully. The doctor enters a covenant with the patient. He penetrates his life, affecting his mode of living, often deciding his fate. The doctor's role is one of royal authority, while the patient's mood is one of anxiety and helplessness. The patient is literally a sufferer, while the doctor is the incarnation of his hope. Perhaps the constraints and demands under which you work don't make it feel like you are the incarnation of your patient's hope, but it's often true anyway. The greatest anxiety I had throughout my whole experience was not the day of the surgery. In a year during which almost everything had been canceled, when the surgical date finally arrived, I was really grateful that it was actually happening. My greatest nervousness was before the consultation, when I would meet some residents, the 2 surgeons, a couple nurses, and some administrative staff. To me, it felt like it was an audition during which I had to humanize myself a little bit before each of them. I had only this one appointment to become a person in their eyes, and I had to do it mostly with words because we were all wearing masks. Each time a different man came in to examine my breasts without being able to read my face, I was thinking about how Emmanuel Levinas, a philosopher, had said, "But the relationship with the face is immediately ethical in nature. The face is what you cannot kill, or at least in the sense that says, 'Thou shalt not kill.'" If our faces tell stories, I wondered, then what is the impact of not being able to see them? The plastic surgeon who had come so highly recommended put me at ease the most when he took the time to ask me just a few questions about my studies and my work. I told him that I had studied the life and thought of John Paul II in Poland for a couple years, and that I was working in politics. The morning of the surgery, a full month after that consultation, he came to greet me just before the surgery, saying, "I recall that you studied in Poland." That was the most reassuring and consoling moment of the day for me. To me, it signified that I had succeeded in becoming a person, not just an object of treatment, but a subject. The thing is, those moments of seeming small talk, because of the context in which they occur, are much, much more consequential than they seem. They may be justifiably forgotten by the physician, but they will be remembered by the patient as constitutive of some defining experience and will become a part of how they tell that story for the rest of their lives. My mom still speaks about how she found it greatly reassuring when her doctors would preface their medical judgment saying, "If you were my spouse," or if you were my daughter. This indicated to her that the doctor truly had her best interest at heart. If he was willing to advise something in the case of his own loved one, then it was clear that he was making the recommendation seriously and had considered it sincerely. The way that you accompany patients in their moments of vulnerability can be also decisive for what they glean from that experience. Your everyday work consists of relating to patients in ways that will echo and reverberate throughout their lives and relationships, even after that person is no longer your patient. What people say about their experiences of care also brings to bear on how we, as a culture, contend with the fragility of being human. And for this reason, your words and gestures, even ordinary ones, are significant. My experience as a patient also reinforced my conviction that medical care cannot be detached from the ethical good and from the truth about the human person. Accordingly, I think doctors and patients have an ongoing responsibility to form themselves morally. Medicine is also a realm where we see the same skills are being used to dramatically different ends. And so it's a question of ethics. Who is the human person who you are trying to heal? No amount of etiquette or niceties can substitute for attention to the real good of the person. And it's precisely because of the esteem in which I hold those who contributed to my life-saving care that I'm really disconcerted and unsettled when I hear about them sometimes treating others in ways that we would consider harmful, that we know are harmful. I have found that it is also healing to be able to trust the person to whom I am entrusting myself. Your ethical commitments matter. My body is not just something that I have, it's also who I am, and so whatever you've done to my body, you've done to me. I can also say a brief word about euphemisms. I find we do damage to reality when we use them in a way that makes it harder for a patient to accept his or her situation. We can think of the euphemisms surrounding euthanasia as obvious examples of distortions of reality. But even in my case, since my own tissue could not be used, my breasts were not reconstructed. but silicone implants were put in their place. And the more that I thought about this matter-of-factly, the truth about the matter, the less surprised and discordant I felt about it. If, in a few years, I need to have the oophorectomy, it matters to me that the person who does it has a reverence for fertility and for maternity. It matters to me that they understand that such a surgery can be both a source of resigned relief and of grief. Above all, that they think about what they are doing in the life of a woman. It's also important for me to find doctors who have reverence before the mystery of human vulnerability, with a confidence to abide the difficulty and recognize the limits. The person is no less valuable when their issues cannot be treated or cured, and the fact is that not all issues can be solved, but that the deepest treatment and cure lies in the personalization and the humanization, in the reverence and care we show toward one another, which is the source of meaning and value in our lives. Sometimes the most healing thing that you can do is abide our difficulty with us. You can say, this may not be successful, but you can take comfort in knowing that you did everything you could to be proactive, open-hearted, responsible, generous, whatever the case may be. Doctor means teacher, to show, teach, or cause to know. Cause your patients to know what may do them harm, of which they are unaware. This is your royal authority, and it depends not just on science, but also on ethics. Not everything that is possible is healing, and in fact, beauty and freedom are fulfilled by limits. So thank you for being here, for taking some time away from the extreme demands of your work and the busyness of your schedules to reflect on the themes of this conference. This, I think, is one of the best ways that you can serve your patients. Conscience rights, after all, are only meaningful insofar as they have a content. Canadian Physicians for Life will help you shine like stars in the world. Neither naive about the current climate, nor willing to compromise because of it. Here, you have an association that can help fortify you in a multitude of ways. So God bless and enjoy the conference.
Wow, man, oh man, that was awesome. When I was talking to Nicole earlier this year about the theme, Humanizing Healthcare, I think you just put a face to the theme. So thank you very much, Amanda. And that was a beautiful, thank you for sharing so passionately, so intimately. Difficult to share those moments, I'm sure, but very gratefully received.